Hey, this thing is loud, isn't it? All right. Well, my name is Chris Dreisbach, and I am, in fact, not only the CEO of Blueprints for Addiction Recovery, I'm also an individual in long-term recovery, very long-term recovery at this point. And that's why I'm going to sit down, because I'm old. I've aged, and not like a fine wine. So, I had this thing happen to me. I don't know if you've ever experienced it, but I used a lot of drugs. Anybody in here use a lot of drugs? Anybody in here love somebody who used a few too many drugs? That's every single hand in this auditorium, right? And we came together tonight to talk about what it looks like after we use all those drugs. What life can look like after we've hit the bottom of the pit, after we've been at the bottom of the barrel, after we have been miserable, after we have left our entire lives in the dust, after we've taken our families through the worst of the worst, after we've taken our loved ones through the worst of the worst. That's what we want to talk about tonight. So for this night of recovery, I have to first start by thanking the Tuscarora Managed Care Alliance for sponsoring this evening and bringing out our special guests, who I'll be introducing you to here in a little bit. But before we start talking about that, I want to talk about our first speaker. I'm not even going to take too much time. But our first speaker tonight is going to be a guy by the name of Jesus Rodriguez. As some of you may know Jesus from his time in the WWE. Some of you may not. But when I met Jesus, he's going to tell you the full story here in a little bit, I'm sure, and it is a rather entertaining story. But when I met Jesus, I met him through Twitter. Very, very, very strange story that he's going to tell you. I never go on Twitter. I'll tell you all about it. But one random night, I logged onto Twitter, and here was this guy who was reaching out to the universe for help. In the worst moment, the worst possible moment of his life, sitting in a detox in San Antonio. Terrible, terrible situation going on. And I just happened to log on to a thing I never log on to at this exact moment at like 2 o'clock in the morning. It doesn't make much sense. So, one of the things I really want to bring out here is what we can do with our lives to help others. Because I wasn't given this great gift of sobriety for no reason. I can assure you that 16 or 17 years ago when I first got sober, I did not believe that I would be sober for more than a couple of weeks. I was on this vicious cycle at that time in my life where I would go to jail. I would get out of jail. They would let me go to rehab. I would get out of rehab and I would relapse immediately, almost instantaneously, every single time, over and over and over again. And no matter how many days or weeks or months I sat incarcerated or in a treatment center or a hospital or a methadone clinic, wherever I was, I would always be thinking about what I could do to keep myself sober when I got out. How am I going to muster the willpower? How am I going to be strong enough to stop this vicious cycle that I'm on? And every single time I got the keys to my life back in my hands, I dropped it and failed instantly. And at the time, this was 2005, 2006, 2007, science hadn't quite caught up to addiction like it has now. We haven't really, at the time, the treatment was a little bit more lackluster than it is here in 2023. And every place that I went to, I, for some reason, would end up in therapeutic communities where they would teach me to keep my shirt tucked in and change my behavior. And if I change my behavior, everything is going to work perfectly for me, because what's wrong with me is clearly my behavior. I'm acting out. I'm acting inappropriately. I'm burglarizing houses. I'm doing all these things that you're not supposed to do. But I'm also not that kind of guy. I come from a good suburban town in Mayes, Pennsylvania. It's not terribly far from here, maybe 2 hours, 3 hours, something like that. And I grew up in the best setting I possibly could. I had a good, lower middle class family. I had brothers. I had mom and dad who are still together to this day. I had everything I could possibly need from the outside. But from the second I can remember anything, there was something real wrong with me internally. And on my best day back then, I could not put to words what it was that was wrong with me. But some of the things I like to talk about are the symptoms that I experienced. And if you can relate to those symptoms, you don't have to stay quiet. You can get loud. You can yell a little bit. I know there's cameras over there, and there's Shannon Moore to my left, but you can yell. You don't have to be nervous. One of the things that I always experienced in my youth was this awful racing mind. Does anybody in here relate to that? A couple of you? Yeah. It was terrible. My mind would always race 1 billion miles a second. I'd think about everything under the sun over and over and over, to the point where I was like an 8-year-old sitting in my room stressing, the Clinton administration. What are they doing? What's happening? I'm 8 years old. I don't even know what's going on, but I'm thinking about it. I'm always thinking about things that should not matter to an 8-year-old. I'd stress about how I'm going to pay my homeowner's insurance one day. I didn't even know how to buy a house. I was 8. But my brain was just off to the races all the time. Another thing that I like to talk about is this awkward social anxiety. Does anybody in here ever feel that one? Yeah. A lot of hands shoot up when you talk about that one. Because I think everybody has a little tinge of that at the very least. Maybe it's a little bit more pronounced in folks like us who struggle with substance use disorder. Perhaps. But it was very pronounced for me because every time I was in any situation, I was uncomfortable. So for example, if I was in a theater in Waynesboro, Pennsylvania, sitting in front of a bunch of people I'd never met before, I would be awfully uncomfortable, just absolutely terrified, because I couldn't connect with any of you. I didn't belong with you. I could never feel that. Never. Not one time. Now, I tell you this many, many years later. Back then I would have said I was bored, or I was uncomfortable, or I was sad, or depressed. I could never quite figure out exactly what that was until one day, after many, many, many trips to treatment centers and jails and so on and so forth, I got introduced to a guy called my sponsor, and he explained to me what that was. That was a lack of connection. That was what I was missing. How do you find a connection? I asked. Anybody know? Steve? Wherever you are? Spiritual disciplines, he says. Okay, that's fair. But like me in 2007, Steve, I wasn't practicing any kind of discipline. The only discipline I was practicing was like getting handcuffed and tossed into a cage. That was like as far as I could get in 2005 and 6 and 7. But thankfully, the world, the universe, I like to call it, kind of tossed these people in my path. These people that were so much smarter than me and had lived this life before, they took me under their wing, and they took me through this crazy book called Alcoholics Anonymous. And this book that was written 50 years before I was born told me exactly why every single time I got the keys to my life back in my hands, I failed. And it didn't make much sense to me at the time because it was written in 1930s speak, and at the time I spoke 2007. And they don't really mesh very well, the 07 and the 1930s speak. And he took the time out of his day to literally explain every single thing to me because I'm a little slow. I don't understand things right away. And he took all that time and he explained that stuff to me. Not only that, he took me with him on all of these crazy adventures where we drive to other towns and pick people up at other halfway houses and take them to meetings and take them out to eat and just show them a little bit of love. And what I didn't realize was he was showing me how to step out of myself and my selfishness, that thing that really drove me to be that creature that I used to be. And I'm pretty confident that guy actually tricked me into working the 12 steps. He tricked me into recovery. But I'm so grateful for him every single day of my life moving forward, because it set me up in these positions that I never thought I would be in. I was in this position to start a business in 2010. I'm a loser. I'm a loser, junkie, convicted felon, guy who probably shouldn't be owning a business, but it happened. And then I got some mentors who showed me how to actually do well at those businesses. Furthermore, the spirit of recovery, the spirit of this beautiful thing that I was given is really founded on giving back and helping other people. So the majority of what we've been able to do with those businesses is bring other people up with us. And here we are in Waynesboro, Pennsylvania, tonight to do that very thing, is to hopefully inspire and excite you guys about recovery, because the 3 speakers that I brought with me are some of the most inspirational and exciting people I know. Yeah, right? Get hype. Come on, somebody. But you better be getting excited, because I'm going to bring out our first speaker. And with that, please help me welcome Mr. Jesus Rodriguez. Good. Be careful.
Thank you, sir.
Be careful.
Thank you. So before we start, they told me not to move around, so I just want to move around for the sake of being a dick. They want me to sit, but I don't like I don't like to sit. I like to move around. So it's going to be very tough to stay in one place because I am jittery and I like to move and I'm nervous. How's it going, guys? My name is Jesus Rodriguez. I'm an alcoholic. I'm here to share a little bit of a story of how my life started and how the process of everything that I kind of went through that led into my career, which I still do now, and the whole process of losing everything and then slowly kind of gaining them back. I am the son of immigrant parents that came from Mexico. I would be lying to you if I were to tell you that I had a horrible childhood, if I had an abusive relationship with my parents, life was hard on me as a kid. I'd be lying to you if I told you that, and I didn't. I had amazing parents who taught me the best that they could, who provided to me the very little that they were able to give to me, but they gave me everything that they had. Between my sister and I mean, our crib growing up was a box with clothes because they were immigrants from Mexico, so they didn't have much. But they were able to give to us whatever they were able to. I've been involved in sports since the age of 4. I played soccer since the age of 4 up until around 12. Once I got into high school, I did sports in high school. I did wrestling, soccer, a little bit of football, volleyball. And then after that, I did a little bit of martial arts before I landed into professional wrestling. Again, great family growing up, good upbringing. Sure, we lived in a little neighborhood in Los Angeles, We had a little barrio, so we had, all sorts of different, the gangs and all that stuff. So I was around it, but I never fell into that. So I was very thankful about my upbringing. My dad drank. He worked 2 jobs, and he always had his beer at home. He would always help us with homework, but he was always having his beer. But I never saw it as anything negative because he worked all day. So his way of kind of unwinding was having a beer. I never thought anything of it. Later on, after I left high school, I started kind of falling in love with pro wrestling. I had a couple teammates who were into pro wrestling, and at the time I thought it was weird because I was doing wrestling in high school. But then eventually, as I got older, I started really getting into it, and I started going to get trained. So I went and got trained in Los Angeles. I did about a year of training before I started professional wrestling, like actual professional wrestling, in 2006. Thankfully, through my connections there, I got to travel throughout, all over California, Mexico, the western states, and then I made my way over to Pennsylvania. Actually, Eastern Pennsylvania was the first time I came to the East Coast. Eventually, I ended up going to Germany. I spent time in Germany. I spent time in France, throughout Europe, traveling. And then in 2010, I got a tryout with WWE. It's a tiny little company. You may have heard of it. There's this guy whose name is Vince McMahon who became my boss. So I started traveling on the road at the age of 24. Side note, before that, I used to work in the adult entertainment industry. So little asterisks in there. That all kind of will lead into how everything kind of started going on. I got introduced to the drugs and alcohol relatively early, at around the age of 20, 21, when I started working in porn. I wasn't in front of the camera. I used to be a graphic designer. Side note. So I was a graphic designer, but I got to go to a lot of these parties, so I got to see a lot of interesting things. I got introduced to cocaine at a relatively early age, and I got to experience those Hollywood parties. And man, they were fun back then. Once I started on the road, I started, again, 24, right? And I was on the road, and I got thrown into this whole rock and roll type of lifestyle of always being on the go. We were on the road 5 days a week. I was home 2 days a week, if that. And that became my life for a good 5 years, straight, nonstop, just constantly be on the go. And as I got more experience, obviously I got more comfortable being out there, and then I got too comfortable to where obviously the parties started coming in, the women started coming along, the drugs started being a part of it. I would be home, like I said, twice a week, and those were my days to unwind. But at first it was great, but after a while, I started having this whole issue with sleeping. Insomnia became a thing. So I couldn't sleep because I was always constantly on the go, on the road, that when I would get home, I was still in that mode of just being go, 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 go. So that was my brain. It was just, oh, I got to be up. Because and then they'll tell you as well, when they come up, for me at least, I started on the road on Friday morning. I would do the events Friday night, travel to the next town, and then go Saturday, Sunday, and then do TV Mondays and Tuesday. And these drives, we wouldn't start these drives to the next town till maybe like around midnight. So we would get to the next town 3, 4 o'clock in the morning sometimes, go to sleep for a couple of hours, wake up, get breakfast, go to the gym, go to the arena, spend the whole day at the arena, do nothing until showtime, and then repeat the process. So it was just constantly go, 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 go. So when I would be home, I didn't have anything to do, so I was still on that mindset. So my way to sometimes kind of supplement the fact that I couldn't sleep was to have a couple of drinks. And that became a thing, right? That became a thing. And as time went on, like I said, I got very comfortable with that lifestyle, just constantly being on the go and then always constantly partying, that I would show up to TV, just hungover, messed up. There were times where like I would get home and I would go straight to a bar as soon as I get home. So I would leave my gear or my suitcase still packed up. I never took it out. I never took my clothes out of the suitcase. I would just throw it into my closet, go to the bar, spend 2 days at the bar basically. And then by the time it was time to go back on the road, I would just get the same luggage and then just take it. So obviously my clothes was not the freshest. And this became a lifestyle after a while. Eventually it got the better of me. And then one day I woke up and I just didn't want to go to work. There was a lot of issues that were going on at TV, at work, with the bosses, and I was just blaming everybody else. And I'll get to all that because I was so good at blaming everybody else. I ended up not going. I called in the office. I said, I'm not coming in. And they asked me where I was. And I was like, I'm at home. I didn't get on the plane. And they're like, all right, just stick around. We'll give you a call back. Let me talk to Vince and at the time, Triple H, Paul. I get a call on a Wednesday night at 5 o'clock. And they told me that they had granted my release, so I was released. And then no more than a minute, not even 30 seconds after I hung up the phone, my Twitter started blowing up that WWE had posted this graphic that I had been released. So I was so mad because in my head, I was like, these fuckers. Sorry, I cuss a lot. I'm sorry. I try not to, but it's really fucking hard. So in my head, I was like, these motherfuckers didn't even wait for me to hang up the phone before they put up this graphic that I was let go. So I was mad. So I went on this bender for like a good month. Solid straight of just drugging and boozing, because in my head I just want to get out of my system, right? I want to like just unwind and let go, whatever. So now I got stuck into this lifestyle of going from like always on the go to nothing. I was so used to being in front of the spotlight, so I had this adrenaline constantly over me that once that spotlight had ended and then the cameras were off, I had nothing. I had nothing that was kind of like filling that adrenaline rush. So I had trouble sleeping. My mind was racing. I had high blood pressure. I had all this stuff. And then because all I knew was drinking, I started taking wine because wine would make me sleepy. So then one glass wasn't doing it anymore. So after a while, 2 glasses, then a whole bottle. And then after that, I wanted to go cheaper routes. So I would get box wine, and I would chug the whole thing, right? So I would wake up with these terrible hangovers. I was like, well, that's not healthy. So let me switch to alcohol. So I started getting vodka. I would take like half a bottle because that was enough for me to maybe go to sleep. And then sure enough, after that, half a bottle wasn't enough. So I would take the whole bottle of it. After the bottle was enough, I would get a jug of that cheap little garbage booze that's at the store. That's like called Pop-Off for like $10 and it's a whole jug. And I would chug the whole thing. After a while, that wasn't enough. So then I would start going out. I started getting a little bit more heavier into the cocaine because once I got that little devil inside of me that was telling me, hey, this is enough, go get something. So I would start finding coke. And at the time, I lived in Orlando, and that was very easy. So it became a constant cycle, right? So you couldn't sleep, so you feel like garbage. So then you drink to feel a little better, but then you wake up feeling like garbage. So then you try to rationalize it. So you get coke to kind of bring you back up, to kind of keep you going. But then the crash, if you've ever done it, don't do it. If you've ever done it, the crash sucks. And so I started crashing. So my way of normalizing it was to get more alcohol. So it became a constant cycle, and that was my life for years. I had burned every bridge possible. I had a nice little piggy bank when I left WWE that by the time I ended it, by the time I ran right through it because all I knew was drinking, boozing, partying, And at the time, I had so many friends, right? Because I had the money, I had the drugs, I had the place. So I had all the friends in Orlando. So by the time that piggy bank ran dry, all my friends were gone, right? How weird is that? So it became, then the depression started sinking in, right? So I needed to find a void because I was so used to just having people around me. I was so used to the fanfare, the lights, the camera. And then all of a sudden it wasn't there anymore. So how do I supplement that void of that vibe was, again, the drugs, the alcohol. That was my void filler. And I just kept going on this cycle. It was nonstop. Eventually, I got to this point where I thought I had a little heart issue, and I ended up in a hospital. Now, I wasn't sure if it was the drugs or if it was the insomnia, because at this point, I had gone about 8 days without sleeping. So I ended up in a hospital. I had heart issues, and I think one of the hardest parts about that was that of all the friends that I had, nobody showed up. So I went into this little, very heavy, deep depression. They had put me on some medication that was supposed to regulate my heart and was supposed to bring my pressure down, and all it did was bring down or make me even more depressed. At the time, I was also seeing somebody who was kind of on the cusp of moving in. And what I'm about to say, it's a personal choice. I'm not pro nor against guns. However, I am against guns in the house, and I'll tell you why. I was never afraid of using it on that person. I always had that little demon inside of my head because, of course, from time to time, we all get sad. So I made a big fuss about it. I didn't want the gun in the house. I was never going to use it on her. I know where my mind goes when I get in those modes. And I was afraid that one day I was just going to call it a day and just blow my head off, especially with that medication that I was on. It brought me way down, and I was constantly sad and depressed. And I tried several times. I tried the pill way, and then I threw it up. Tried the gun, and I wussed out at the end. I was ready to call it a day. But at the time, it was weird because I was like, no, I'll drink. And then that'll make me go and do it. So when I tried the gun deal, it didn't work out. When I tried the pill deal, I tried chasing it with alcohol, so I just threw it right back up. But I didn't know there was such a thing as getting help. I didn't know that was a thing. I was just, in my head, I was like, you're just a little bitch. Right? That's all I kept saying to myself, you're just a little bitch. Eventually, I got an offer to go to India. So I got called, and it was random. I got called to open up a wrestling school in India. So I went to Jalandhar, India for 6 months. And I opened up a school over there. And for the time that I was there, it was great. I had a mission, I had a purpose, I had something to do. I stayed clean for a good while. But I'm an addict. The little itch comes back. And granted, India's a little bit more conservative, especially the little town that I lived in. It was more conservative. So it wasn't like here in the U.S. where there's alcohol blasted all over the place. So it's not like a constant temptation. But again, I'm an addict, and I know they have it. So I'm going to go find it. So sure enough, I had to go find it. And it was kind of like finding little speakeasies where you kind of have to know where the place is, and you have to knock on the door and tell them, hey, here's, X amount of rubies, and then they will give you a bottle. So, yeah, I went maybe 4 or 5 months clean over there, and then I would just get blasted on alcohol. I came back to the U.S. So I come back to the U.S., and I go back onto my BS. At the time, I was still living in Orlando. At the time, I had already burned through all my bridges, right? All my relationships, my friends, my significant other at the time, I had burned right through it. And I ended up leaving. I went to San Antonio, Texas for a little while. I was going to start fresh. I was going to start new. I was going to be good. And that lasted for a good 2 months or so. And I went right back to my BS. So then I got this deal to go down to Mexico City to do a TV show down in Mexico City, which I did. And I was there for about 5 months. And it was great. It was awesome. We finished the season, and I was going to go up to Los Angeles to go visit my family. And I did. And it was awesome. It was a lot of great fun, all this, da-da-da. And then COVID happened. So right before I was supposed to go back to Mexico City, COVID happened, so everything shut down, so I couldn't go back to Mexico City. So what does a good druggy alcoholic do with nothing to do and time and money? Go get plastered. So I spent months just getting wasted and hammered. At the time, I was staying at my mom's. I was staying on her couch for a little while because, again, I was only going to go visit just for a little bit and before we started shooting again, so I was going to go back to Mexico City. But again, that never happened. And there was a liquor store right behind our apartment complex. So that's how I spent months, just drinking, boozing, pissing myself because I would get hammered. I ruined like 2 of her couches because I would just get either puke or just piss all over myself. There was one time where I didn't have any money because she would take my wallet from me, but I knew that she had a little box. She used to like to collect the $2 bills, and she used to collect the 50-cent coins. And I knew she had it. I know where it was, but because I'm a good addict and I'm a hell of a bullshitter at the time, I would go and I would sneak into her box, and then I would take the money and I would go get my little pints of vodka. All I needed was $5. That's all I needed. I needed $5, right? So I went through her box. I took all her collection and I traded in for booze. And then one day she comes home, and I'm gone. And she wakes me up, and I got so mad that I swung and I punched the window, and she kicked me out. And I don't know where I got $20 from, but there was $20 in my pocket. It was a winter night, and I ended up going to the liquor store. I bought a jug, and I went and I slept behind a CVS under a bush. I was fucked up. I didn't know how I got there. A friend of mine ended up picking me up, and shortly thereafter, I got taken to a detox center called in Tarzana, California. And this is my first time going through like a detox type deal. The very first night that I get there, I get placed in a bed next to somebody who had just came in maybe an hour or two after I did, and he was coming off of something. Point is, he had a seizure. They called in the ambulance, and they took him away, and then later that night, they had told us that the guy had passed away on his way to the hospital. That was the first kind of a time where that was weird to me because I didn't know how to process what had just happened. I saw it happen. He was right next to me, and then all of a sudden, he's not. So I got out, right? I spent my 5 days there. They put me on Vivitrol. And for a good solid 8, 9 months or so, I was good. I was fine. And then I get a call to go to Egypt. So I ended up going to Cairo, Egypt, and I lived there for roughly about a year. Constantly in and out of Egypt. And I did really great over there. It was a lot of fun. But every 3 months, I have to go in and out, right, because of the visa. I ended up doing a little bit of time in Spain, in Barcelona. And that's where I just went downhill from there again. I went back to my bullshit. I finished my time in Spain. I came back to the U.S. and I went back to my bullshit. So now I'm in San Antonio at this time, and I'm going through my bullshit. I'm doing it again. I kept waking up in alleyways, not knowing how I got there. I would wake up in the car with the door open, my wallet my money just spread all over the dashboard, and then I don't know how I would get there. One day I wake up, and as Chris was mentioning earlier, I wake up in San Antonio at the detox center at the hospital. And this is the first time out of all the times that I've woken up in a detox center that I still have my phone. How? I don't know. But I had my phone. And at the time, I had gone through my piggy bank. I had burnt all my bridges. My parents were hella furious at me. The people that I was staying with had basically kicked me out at the time. And I was like, I'm done. I'm tired. This is the same repetitive story every single time. I have nowhere to go. At the time, I don't know, I was 35, 36. Like, I have nothing left anymore. I thought I had built this legacy within the professional wrestling world, and I had pissed it all away for one thing, for one vice. So I went on Twitter, and I posted I needed help. And it just so happens that Christopher, as he had mentioned, he never goes on Twitter, and it just so happened that he had seen it. So he sends me this message that if I was really serious about getting help, that he would work something out. Now, WWE has this program where if you spend time with them, and you go through this because it's a very common deal, apparently, they can help you out, which is great. But in my head, I was like, well, I'm talking to somebody. Let me kind of see what happens. So I looked up blueprints. I looked up Lancaster. I looked up what he looked like. And then, so I looked up Lancaster. I'm like, there's nothing there. It's just farms and Amish. And then I looked up what he looked like. And then in my head, I was like, man, fuck it. But like, if I end up going, and then he picks me up and then takes me to some farm and ties me up in a silo and then just comes out wearing a robe, telling me to put lotion on my skin. Then, you know what? Fuck it. I've had a good life. But I was scared. I was scared because for the first time I was putting my life in somebody else's hands. Because this whole time frame, I was in my head, right? Because I'm a Latino, I'm a man, I'm tough. I don't share my expression. I don't express my feelings. I don't tell anybody how I feel. I'm not weak. I'm not a bitch, right? So we grew up with that mentality, and for the first time, I was not in control. And that is such a weird place to be. Because in my head, mentally, I was in control all the time. And for the very first time, I was no longer in control. And I was so hesitant. I still resisted sometimes. But for the first time, my hands were tied, and then it was up to somebody else. So I agreed to it. I ended up coming up here to Lancaster. He picked me up like at 3 in the morning, 2 in the morning, 2 or 3 in the morning from Harrisburg. And then he takes me to the recovery house. And I was so used to living by myself, right? I've been solitary for so long that now I'm in this house with a bunch of other dudes. My roommate at the time was an older gentleman. He just snored like a motherfucker. So that took a while to get used to. I show up to the rehab center the next morning, and then I sit in the little community group chat with everybody, and I'm looking at everybody, and I'm like, what am I doing here? I have nothing in common with these guys. These guys are druggies. These guys are alcoholics. I am nothing like them. I'm a big city guy. I've lived this extravagant, awesome life with the houses, the cars, the women, all this. I've lived that. Like, I have nothing in common with anybody here. And the more I sat there, and the more I kept going to the therapy and the process of the speaking, I got to realize, and in hearing everybody else's story, I realized that the more I felt that I was different from them, the more I realized that I was just like them. We may have come from different backgrounds. We may have different stories of how we got there, but we're all battling the same addiction. We're all battling the same demon, right? And that demon may have a different name, but it's all the same thing because we're weak to it. So little by little, I started slowly letting my guard down. I started going through the process of actually speaking. And don't get me wrong, I still struggle with it. This is not something you just give up. This is a process of like 37 years in the building or in the making to just let it go. And then my time was coming up. My time was coming up at Blueprints, and I had talked to Chris. We had talked previously about how I've been to different countries and I've opened up wrestling schools other places. And he just kind of goes, well, why don't you just open up your own? Obviously, because I didn't have the way to do it, nor I didn't have a place. In my head, it was an impossible mission. It was something that was just like so far-fetched. I was like, how was I going to do that? But again, now I'm in the process now of just letting something else bigger than me take control. I was, again, and this is still something I struggle with, of me being in control. I still struggle with that, and it's still hard. But I'm letting the universe kind of take the wheel, right? So I ended up settling. I've been living in different countries for so long, for so many years, that I never established anything for myself. And I was always on the go, but anywhere that I went, I always found a way to get fucked up, right? And I was really good at that. And everywhere that I went, anything that ever happened in life, I was super good at blaming somebody else. I was super awesome at victimizing myself because everything that was happening to me was not because of me, it was because of XYZ. And that became my life. But now, once I started kind of going through this process of getting better, of seeing that there's beauty out there, being mindful, of being understanding that I am only something so small compared to the greater picture of the universe, that I can achieve something, but I couldn't do this by myself. None of this is achievable on your own. It takes a group effort. And I'm beyond thankful that because of that, because of Chris, because of Blueprints, because of everybody that has been on my path so far, has gotten me to the point where I now own my own business. We have something that I'm able to give back to the community. I have my own professional wrestling company. I have my own pro wrestling school. We have events every month. We are able to give back to the community. We do charitable events. I'm able to do this. And if it wasn't also for people that were able to come up to a stage like this and talk about their issues, I never would have known that this was even a thing. Because again, to me, all of this, and then I know this is something, I'm stealing a line from you, we're breaking the stigma. So I'm sorry, I know you're going to speak about it a little later too. But again, the concept that we're not allowed to speak about our feelings or what we're going through, otherwise you're weak. This was something that was ingrained to me for so long that I didn't know that was a thing until I've realized that there were other people out there who had gone through similar experiences, who were actually strong enough to speak about it, go get help, and then give that information on to somebody else. And if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be here. Because I know that if I had held on to everything that was going on back then, I definitely would have been in the grave by now. Because that's where I was going. At the time, I was willing to go down that route, and I'm glad I didn't. But if it wasn't for getting help, for getting treatment, for going and actually wanting to change my life, because ultimately you have to want it. If you don't want it, it's not going to happen. I'm thankful that I'm here with you guys today. And as scary as this is for me, because I can talk to you about wrestling all day long, but if I give to you a little bit of me, that scares the shit out of me. There's a side of me that you can just look up on Google. There's a side of me that I tell my close friends. There's still a side of me that I refuse to let go of myself, because that's how I identify as me. But it's so scary to be able to feel vulnerable. And I'm okay with that, because that same fear is also what encourages me to move forward. If there's anything that's out there that I feel like I hope that you guys are able to get out of this, is that so long as there's breath in your lungs, you're able to get help, because there's still hope in there, right? So long as there's still a beat in your heart, you still have hope. I just want to say thank you guys for being here tonight. You guys could have been anywhere else, but you chose to be here, and that means the world to us. So thank you guys very much. My name is Jesus Rodriguez, and I'm an alcoholic.
Thanks, Jesus. I think one of the most important pieces of what Jesus talked about was finding purpose. Because when I met him, he was lacking purpose. And he really didn't even feel like he deserved to get help. And that made me hearken back to 2005 and 6 and 7, when I was so dehumanized by the process of going to jail and going to treatment and going to jail and going to treatment, that I didn't even feel like I deserved to get help. There's something very dehumanizing about being saddled with an illness that doesn't even allow you to see reality. And that's something that is very difficult for people who've never experienced it to understand. It's so difficult, because when we live in our reality, that is our world. But when you're struck with substance use disorder and you're actively using drugs, you're not living in reality. I was not living in reality, but my reality was mine, and it was real to me. And that becomes very problematic. But really what I took from Jesus' story there is that if you build a life that is so filled with purpose and is so much better than the life you used to live, there is really effectively no reason to even debate going back to the life we used to live. And I'm so thankful that I've found that, and I'm so thankful that I'm able to help other people find that. And then I'm even more thankful that I get to watch them help other people find that, who then go on to help other people find that. And it never ends. It's a beautiful cycle instead of the vicious cycle that I used to live with. So with that, I want to introduce you our next speaker. I met Chris not all that long ago, but I can tell you that Chris is one of the most kind-hearted guys walking the earth. I can tell you that Chris came out here from northern Kentucky to come talk to you tonight. And if that doesn't tell you anything, I mean, northern Kentucky is a beautiful place. So with that, I want to give you the Wildcat, Chris Harris.
Thank you, Chris. I'm going to sit with you.
Good.
Hopefully everybody can still see me. Thank you, Jesus. I also want to thank you for clarifying which side of the camera you were on for that porn film. Appreciate that. We have so much we all have so much in common, but as Chris said, it's just a different path to get there. I'm going to try to stay on point. A lot of times when we talk, I might just wander a little bit, because when you get hit in the head for a living for so many years, your memory just isn't there as much anymore. But yeah, my story it's a little different than most, because what I would have considered my rock bottom happened years before I got sober. A lot of people, they find their rock bottom, and then it's time. Then they finally accept the help. My rock bottom was years before. In the wrestling world, I started, next year will be my 30th year in the business. I started back in '94, like we all do, just made my way up, trying to get a break. In 2000, I signed my first contract with WCW. So I was there the last year they were in business, which, you know, you're excited for because you finally made your break, but then they go out of business, they get sold. So that was it. Then another company came along, a brand new company called TNA, Total Nonstop Action. I was there from '02, from the beginning, to '08, and that was the best years of my career. I had so much fun there. That's really when I really enjoyed my professional wrestling career. And then in '08, I spent a year with the WWE. And then it was right after that when things kind of fell for me. Jesus mentioned it. So many of those years, it's kind of part of what we do. It's just part of our lifestyle, you know, going out and hanging out with the boys, having some drinks, you know, partying after the matches. It's just kind of like our lifestyle. And I never did it anything out of control. I did it just like everybody else. We'd have our drinks, and I was a beer drinker at the time. We might throw some shots in there, but it was just normal activity. We were always in a group, so if on this night this guy had too much, we'd take care of him, get him back to his room. If it was me that maybe had too much one night, my boys got me back to my room. We were all safe. So we kind of kept it in control, at least I thought it was. In '08, my experience with the WWE wasn't so great. So by the time I left there in '08, that's when I kind of took my turn. I was already a drinker. I'd been a drinker my whole life, but just nothing out of control. That's when the depression hit, and I started having some serious issues with anxiety. I was always one of those guys, when you talk about depression or anxiety, it's like, hey, just pick yourself up. You know, tomorrow's a new day. It was all words, and that's when I realized that anxiety and depression is a real thing. It will take you down, and my solution to all that was alcohol. That was my demon, was alcohol. I've actually never even been involved with drugs, and it's almost like I sit here and I say it like I'm a saint, but that alcohol can be just as much of a devil. It can be just as deadly. So, but that's what I stuck to. For some reason, I can say no to drugs all these years when it's in front of me, but I was a drinker, and so that was what I took to try to cope with myself. It just became more of a regular thing. That's when I started finding out that I would do things like, you know, maybe from the night before I would have had too much. Well, the next morning I get up and, you know, it's still in your system, so just keep it going. I'd find myself start drinking in the morning. Just some of those things that just register in your head to where it's like there's becoming a problem here. So I went through many years, and during this course of time after '08, once I wasn't in wrestling full time, I guess I thought to myself, I'm getting in a bad spot here. I'm from the Northern Kentucky, Cincinnati area. The girl I was with at the time, she was from the Orlando, Florida area. So I thought, you know, life after wrestling, let's make a big move. Things are going to change. Things are going to be so much better. I made that move, and as us alcoholics find out, new time, new place, same devil. All I did was down there, I tried to start a whole new life for myself, but I just didn't put as much as I could have in it. A lot of wrestlers, when they get out of the spotlight, that's kind of hard to take. You know, if you have to go back to the real world, it's just more just depressing, and you know, you think of yourself, you know, when you're going back to the real world, it's like just a few years ago I was on TV. It was just, there was so much that I was using as an excuse to bring me down. And down in Florida, I've started finding drinking buddies down there, and the same reoccurring thing happened. I wound up split with my girls, so now I'm in a different place. My family's all up in the Kentucky, Cincinnati area, so I was left alone, and it wasn't a matter of me just blowing what I had. It was a matter of what I had saved up, because I felt like I did pretty good with my money, but the whole idea of life after wrestling, let's move to Florida and continue on. Well, those savings, they run out pretty quick. I tried to keep myself afloat with wrestling, doing the independent scene, but you quickly, go back to when you're paying your dues coming up. That doesn't pay the bills, and it just kept falling and falling and falling. And during this time is when I was really, I like to say I had several wake-up calls from God. He was sending me some messages to where it was like I have to do something about it. And whether it's just hard-headed, being stupid, or I was an idiot. A couple things that I'll let you know, and they involve the being arrested. They involve health issues. I have enough arrests on my record, many alcohol-related, some DUIs in there as well. The worst one was I caused an accident. It finally caught up on me, the drinking and driving. I hear this from other stories. I mean, so many of us talk about how many times we've done it and just never got caught. This time I hurt somebody else. I was one of those guys where I hurt somebody else. I was in an accident. I totaled my car. Somebody got hurt. I wound up waking up in the hospital with cuffed to my bed. It just bad situation. You can almost imagine the kind of legalities that I had to go. Somehow I kept my ass out of jail. I just chalked that up to a great attorney. But if that wasn't a wake-up call right there to let me know that, causing something like that, for me to sit there and think to myself, okay, and it did go through my mind. It's like this, after something like this, I have to get some control. I got to stop the drinking. And I couldn't tell you, I don't want to make up what it was, but weeks, months, I was back to drinking again. And slowly following that is the drinking and driving again. I was just too much of a dumbass to smarten up to change that. And it wasn't, these two instances were not even a year apart. But I wound up in the hospital. I had just had some pains and wound up in the hospital. And it turns out that a lot of people, they tear up their liver, maybe your kidneys. I tore my pancreas up. My pancreas is destroyed. A lot of it points to the drinking, from excessive drinking. I'm in Florida in the hospital, and they're telling my parents that I have a 50-50 chance of living. Or better yet, 50-50 chance of dying. My parents come to Florida. They're at the hospital with me. I mean, it's that bad that my life is on the line, and, I'm destroying my organs. If that isn't enough reason to smarten up and quit the damn drinking, I was in the hospital for a month. They tell me that the pancreas is unforgiving. There's no getting that back. In order to get, I guess, just to get something working to get inside, I couldn't eat. I didn't eat at all for 30 days in the hospital. I was on a tube, feeding tube. Then when I was released, 30 days at home, I was still on a feeding tube. 60 days, I could not eat or drink anything. All I could have was broth and juice. That was all I could have. And I think I went maybe another month because I was smart now. I was going to smarten my act up. I was going to clean myself up after something like this. And then you got the wreck and all my arrests, and now I got a health issue. I'd say within another month, I'm hooking up with my buddy, and I had already tried it, hanging out with them, and there was a couple times where I chose not to drink, and I'm thinking, I got this. But then I can remember the first drink I had. I was sitting in the bar with him, which was dumb enough to go to the bar, but then we order a couple shots just like we had done before. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I guess we'll see how this goes down. I could have dropped over dead, but I'm still toasting with the guy and be like, well, let's see what happens. Do the shot right in the bar, and on I went. The drinking kept going. I just you can't be more of an idiot. And again, I look at it as, now that I can look back, it's like, how many How many signals does God have to send me to where I'm going to finally open my eyes and wake up? But it continues. I wind up getting back to Cincinnati. My family helps me out. Thank God I have some legalities down there, trying to take care of the court situation. I wound up back in Cincinnati. Now I want to try to start over again. But the drinking never left. It was still there. And nothing was really getting better in life. So the drinking just got heavier. And, through all this, people knew that there was a problem. Even I knew there was a problem. I had started to accept to the fact that, when people would ask me, even my doctors, the doctors would ask, because I think they kind of knew what answer they were going to get. Do you think you're an alcoholic? And, we avoid that at all costs, or, denial. Denial is one of our biggest things. But I would say, yes, I'm an alcoholic, but I'm not going to quit. I don't plan on quitting. So I would admit I was an alcoholic. In my mind, I knew that I needed to stop. Arrest, health issues. I mean, my doctors were on me so much about, hell, I'm going to wind up dying, but I just couldn't stop. And this is during the time where I actually started to rebuild part of my life. Those were all my rock bottoms. Things started to get a little bit better. I started to work a little bit towards things. During all those rock bottoms moments, I mean, I had no job, I had no car, I had no house. I mean, I was begging my parents for money just so I could eat. I mean, this is a guy that, was a TV star not that long ago, and I'm practically homeless. So thank God I never had to sleep on a park bench or anything, but I had nothing. And once I got back home, at least I had my family that they were definitely there for me. But as I started to rebuild a little bit, I got a full-time job. I stayed with a few people for a few years, but then I wound up getting my own house. I was renting a house, so I had a house. I had a job. Things were starting to get better. Then I met I actually knew her years before, but I was married and divorced from years prior and never thought it would happen again, especially with everything I was going through. I mean, what the hell did I have to offer? Who wants to date somebody that has no home, no job? Take me home to the parents. Hey, meet this guy. So things started to come together. I saw my wife again. We'd known each other from years prior. We hooked up and started hanging out again together. We were older, but she was single, I was single. Neither one of us had kids. It was just like, hey, time was right, and we started hanging out. Next thing you know, she's a Georgia girl. She moved up with me, and she starts helping me because there was a lot of baggage. There was a lot of baggage there, especially from my arrest. Things just don't go away, and she really helped me take care of things like that. Whether it was, money or, my license was gone I didn't drive for 7 years. That's a long time. Just different consequences, I call them now, that I had to deal with because of my past. But things were starting to really come together. And I was thinking to myself, I was really starting I was doing it. And I wound up getting married, and I got remarried again. And I had a wonderful wife, and things were going great, but I was still a drinker. I still could not shake that devil. Yes, I was an alcoholic, but I could control it. I knew how to control it. I like to call in the program, we call them like little mini victories, because just to show, even though I had a problem, just to show I had a little bit of control over it. Maybe there was one night where people were going to be drinking, but I went to that, and however I did it, I didn't drink for that night. So for us alcoholics, we think, hey, I didn't drink that night. I had control of it. I said no. Then we start putting little, like making deals with ourselves. Like for this night, when I'm going to drink this night, well, I just will make sure I don't start until at this point. Or I'm only going to have this many drinks and then I'll cut off here. we start making these little, and they wind up being little mini victories, because the next day we look at ourselves and almost want to pat ourselves on the back because we actually did it for a night. Or maybe we did it for a weekend. Or maybe I went a week without a drink. Well, then I definitely deserve one. So I hammer it on then. And my family knew I had a problem. I knew I had a problem. My wife was starting to see it with her own eyes because she had to live with it. And I started bringing her down. Not that I would hide it from my family and friends. I mean, people knew. I mean, we think we're hiding it, but they know. But I would at least, let's say I wouldn't make a complete ass of myself. When I was in family or friends, I would at least try to control myself to a point to where once the night's over and all the people that can handle it, they know when to stop. I didn't stop. On the way home from whatever we're doing, I'd tell my wife, pull in the liquor store. Because I wanted to continue. I wasn't ready to stop. So then I'd get home and I'd just keep the drinks coming. Usually they were stronger by that point. As I said before, I was a beer drinker most of the time with some shots. That was kind of how I did. But I also, Jesus mentioned it, I switched to vodka. I switched to hard liquor. Very rare did I drink beer. I was more into making the mixed drinks now. And when you mix mixed drinks with shots, that's even worse. And again, I'm trying to defend myself with my wife. Well, I'll just drink beer and shots tonight, so it won't be as bad as the liquor. I mean, she didn't care. She knew what kind of night that was going to be. Whenever we would get ready to, if there was a plan to drink, before I even took a drink, she already was in a bad mood. And I'm looking at her like, why are you ruining the night already? I'm blaming it on her. Why are you getting mad already? I haven't even taken a drink. It's because she knew what the night was going to come to. I had already ruined her night. She was dealing with all this, and I was dragging her down, but I made one promise to my wife. I was trying to be as honest as I could with her. I said, I can't promise I'll never drink again, because I knew I was an alcoholic, but I thought I had control, and I could never see myself not drinking. I mean, it was such a part of my life. Even if I wasn't a everyday drinker, which another mini victory for me. I wasn't a daily drinker, so on the weekends I would just let it loose and tie one on. But I told her, made a promise to her. I said, I can't promise I'll never drink again, but I do promise I will never drink and drive again. Because of all the things she had helped me with, and I went through, I'd never wanted to go through that again. And I'll just get right to the point. Guess what I did? Not only did I drink and drive again, I was pulled over right in front of my house. Immediately I call her, thinking that if something's happening, I'd at least want her to know what's going on. So I tell her, and of course the cops tell me to get off the phone, but I just wanted her to know what was going on. So she comes out. So not only am I being arrested, she has to witness all this, witness her husband being cuffed, witness her husband being put in a cop car. And I had gone years, I don't know how many years, 5, 6, 7, 8 years without anything during this, the rebuilding process. The rebuilding process was probably a 4 or 5 year process. And I was doing really good. But then once that hammer came down, that was it. I got out of, once she bailed me out, we didn't talk for 3 days in the same home. And I was just so defeated because I had been doing so good, and I thought that, I'm almost proud of myself. And the drinking is something heavy on me, but I got it. It's not going to be a problem anymore. And I was so ashamed and embarrassed. I was lucky enough with some of my other arrests to kind of keep them on the down low. I wasn't a big social media guy, and I just didn't make a lot of my business public. It was like the second day or the next day, second day, I'm not sure, and she comes up and slams the phone in my face, and it's all over TMZ. And so she, it caused a pretty big strain there. And during this time, we're not talking for a few days. I didn't know what I was going to do. Of course, now I was just so defeated. I mean, am I going to jail? I had told her at one point, if something else happens, then I would probably wind up going to jail. So as she's witnessing me being arrested, she's thinking I'm going away, that I'm going to be gone. That was when things changed for me. And I think Chris or Jesus had said it earlier, nothing is going to happen until you want it to happen. And I had not wanted it to happen before that. No matter what health problems, no matter what, how much trouble I got into, I had just not wanted it. And at that moment, I was willing to do whatever. And that's when I had some people reach out to me, and thank God they did. I had a few people reach out in the wrestling world and just kind of talk to me about how there was another way. And one of them sitting right over here is Shannon Moore. A call from him, and just talking to these people that had done it. And I think we've all heard the stories. If we're following wrestling, I mean, so many of these people that I knew had problems in the past, and now I'm working with them at different events, and they're all sober, and I'm like, how the hell did that happen? Jake the Snake was one of them. I couldn't believe, his story. Dustin Rhodes, I was always close with him. I couldn't believe what he had accomplished. Road Dogg, I couldn't believe his story. And these are guys that I had been around when they were in their addiction. Just to see what they had done, and so same thing with them. They had, now that once I started hearing their story and somebody had reached out to them, now I was having some people reach out to me and letting me know that there was another way. And who am I to argue? That was at the point where I was like, you know what? That's proof for me. God gave me enough chances. I guess he had to slam this one in my face. And I had to go, as miserable as another DUI was to go through, and I did have to suffer some consequences. But as bad as that was, if that had not happened, if I had not gone through that, then I would have never had those conversations, and I would have never finally said, you know what, I don't have control. And that's when I was willing to surrender and give the control to someone else that knows what they're doing. And that's one of the first things that we learn in AA is to admit that we're powerless. And that's a pretty strong thing when you really think about it, to admit you're powerless over alcohol. It has the control over you. We don't have it over it. We may think we do, but then we have that hard lesson that lets us know that it's not. And so even if it took going to treatment and leaving my wife and put myself through that, because that was suffering to me, having to put myself in a facility and stay there like I'm going to camp or something. But I was willing to do it, and through these friends, these great people like Shannon, they made it easy for me, I should say. They were willing to take care of everything as long as I would say I'll go, and I went. And as alcoholics, and I didn't even learn this until I was kind of going through my treatment, but the relapse number is crazy to me. I just couldn't believe how many people I was in treatment with that had been there 10 times, 12 times. I just couldn't believe how many times they relapse and then go back. And hearing some of their stories, maybe that's what got me to what I was doing, because I was sitting there during my groups, my classes, and I'm sitting there telling myself, the hell with that. This is one and done for me. I want to take everything I can into this, and I have to put as much work in it as I can to learn and to hear from those that have done it and those that have years of sobriety, because I'm wondering how did they do it? And I just have to sit there and listen. I had to take it in, keep my mouth shut and open my ears and listen. And whatever they did, I was willing to do, no matter what it took, because it's a complete lifestyle change, but I was willing to do it. I went through 60 days of treatment, got as much of the education as I could, but the one thing I was more scared about than anything was going back out into the real world, because we have a certain lifestyle where that drinking is involved. Some are taught to change people, places, things. You have to change your complete world. Thank God I did not have to. My wife it's not like she was a heavy drinker. I don't have to worry about having alcohol in the house or anything like that. And she was completely supportive. I can't stress enough how great my support system has been. But once I came out, I did what I was supposed to do. You know, we're taught that we have to go to the meetings. We have to get a sponsor. We have to work our steps. I mean, this is all things that we learn in the program, and I'm not sure what level anybody is, if it's something that you've thought about. I was just willing to do whatever I had to do. And coming out, getting a sponsor, for example, I don't want to go up to a complete stranger and ask them if I can call them for the rest of my life. But it was something I had to do. I forced myself to do it, and God made it easy for me. He kind of put that path in, and I just had to follow it. And I wound up having a great sponsor. I'm still working the steps. I just passed my 2 years. That's actually very early compared to some that I work with that are in 20, 30 plus years. But I'm still to the point where I want to do what they're doing. What do they do at 30 years different than what I'm doing at 2? They don't. They do the same thing. They keep going to their meetings. It's something that you have to make part of your lifestyle. And one way I like to explain it is addiction is a disease. And this is our disease. And we have to take our medicine to help us with that. Going to meetings is medicine for me. Working with my sponsor is medicine for me. It's something that I have to keep doing to make me stronger. If I didn't have any of that, there's so many stories I hear of why did this person relapse? Why did that person relapse? And majority of the time, it's because they stopped doing one of those things. They stopped going to meetings, or I don't talk to my sponsor much anymore. It always falls into that category. So I know what road that takes me, so let me keep going on this road. So I just wanted to do everything I could to give me the best chance to stay sober. And it is hard. It's very hard, but I kept doing that, and it made it worth, not only worth it, it made it a little easier for me, because it's like for example, when I go to a meeting, the outside world can still beat us down, and we still have our bad days. But once I'm in there surrounding myself with people that are going through the same disease that I'm going through, and we share our stories, and we get something out of that, and I walk out of those meetings feeling better than when I walked in, and I'm ready to take on the world then. Part of what we do, like one of the things we do that we say in AA, it works if you work it. It takes work. You have to be willing to put that work in. Another thing they always tell us to do in AA is, once you start working on yourself, to start helping others as well. I think I kind of used the excuse, at least in my first year, even longer than that. Whenever that would be brought up, I was always, I'm still working on myself. I'm still learning the program, so I don't know how much help I can really be to others. And I was told by people I respect that if you have one day more than someone else, you have something to offer. And I started to learn that when I was working with others, when I was working with people that maybe only had 30 days in or 60 days in, I did feel like I had something to offer. Am I still struggling? Hell yeah. It's still a struggle. Those people that have 30 years are still struggling. But I found out that reaching out to others really does, not only will it maybe help somebody else, but that also helps keep me sober. That helps me stay sober, because I'm telling my story, and I get to maybe reach somebody, and it makes me feel good and makes me want to continue it. It motivates me to keep going. So even things like this, things that you're doing, Chris, being able to talk to all of you, again, I don't know what level you are or what your thoughts may be. If you think that maybe this is something you need to get into, learn more about, maybe you want to take that step for treatment. If I have reached anybody, maybe you can or can't relate to my story. Maybe you can relate to one of ours. But if I could reach just somebody out here that is listening, that I feel like I've done something. And you know what? That keeps me sober. You guys tonight have kept me sober. So I want to thank you so much for being here. Thank you for helping me in my journey. And I hope that you get something out of tonight. So thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate you, man. Well, thanks, Chris. That was awesome. one of the things there that I want to kind of pull out of that is that his story is vastly different from mine, vastly different from Jesus's, vastly different from Shannon's. But something Jesus said was that separation. When he first got into treatment, he was separate from everybody else. He was different. He wasn't like you. When I first got to treatment, I wasn't like the people around me. I always felt separated. I was never able to be connected. And once I got sober and I started to learn from people who were way smarter than me, I started to discover that there are so many similarities despite those differences. And as soon as I shove those differences out of my brain and I focus on the similarities, my whole world gets better because I'm connected with you. Even though Chris has a vastly different life than me, I can relate to the despair, to that pain of doing something that you know is something I shouldn't do. But for some reason, my brain is shoving me that way and making me do it. So that despair is something that I feel like almost everybody who struggles with substance use disorder can come together and relate to. So with that, I want to give you the main event speaker. The reason that everybody came to the Waynesboro Theater tonight is to see Shannon Moore. And I got a special delivery of popcorn for this one because it is in fact so good. I ordered DoorDash from the Waynesboro Theater. See this? It's real. So with that, I'm going to give you Shannon Moore. Clap for him. Popcorn. Look, Bobby got you one.
What's up, guys? Nice. It's a nice addition, Chris. You never let us down, do you, buddy? So I want to say a couple of things first before I jump into my story. One, if I fall asleep up here, I haven't relapsed. Chris didn't stop me from buying the PM cold and flu medicine a while ago at Dollar General. So if I nod out up here, I have not relapsed, I promise. And two, I may or may not pee my pants while I'm up here because I got to use the bathroom really bad.
It's going to be real interesting.
Yeah. So enjoy your popcorn, boys. Yeah, man. So, seems like the topic is like everybody's story's different, but it's the same general route, right? For me, I feel like I'm a product of my childhood to a certain extent. I've worked with a lot of people, and I think some of the traumas from our childhood can help keep us sick as well. Some of the traumatic events that we go through that we never learn to process, we never learn to work through. For me, man, my childhood was chaos. Like, my household was chaos. My mother, she was married before she met my dad, had 2 kids, had 3 kids. I had 2 half-brothers and a sister. My one half-brother, he was a drug addict. He was probably 20 years older than me. So, whenever I was a kid, like, he was, way up into his teen years or early 20s, and seeing the chaos that would go on in my household throughout his addiction would make me as a kid just go, man, like, I do not want to be that dude right there because of the chaos that he caused in my household. But, on top of that, like, my mom, like, whenever I was born, 1, 2, and 3 years old, it's like the chaos that my mom was going through. Like, her ex-husband, their father, had killed himself, committed suicide. My half-brother Jay had drowned, with my other half-brother being a drug addict. Like, you can only imagine just what my mom was going through. So for her to raise the kids and try to keep it together for us after going through all that stuff, it was just a lot of chaos. And my dad, like, he was working 2, 3 jobs just trying to provide for the family. So by the time I was born until I was 9 years old, it's like all these crazy events, man. Like, my brother had drowned. My half-brother was in and out of prison already, out of jail, committing all these crazy acts. I'd see him beat his girlfriends and his wives and, like, all this nonsense. And then whenever I was 4, my grandfather, he was murdered. At 8 years old, I was molested. By the time I was 9, my father was in a car accident and he was left paraplegic. So the household was nothing but chaos. And my mom, she had to, like, move away pretty much to live at the hospital to take care of my father because he was in a coma for a year. And then from there, she ended up moving into the rehabilitation center in Asheville, North Carolina. to try and bring him out of the coma so she could bring him home. So it was pretty much me left to kind of raise myself. And then I had one brother that she had with my father, and, he was popping in and out, checking on me, but pretty much the neighborhood was, raising me at that point. But there was something that I found that would help me through it, and that was pro wrestling. Like, I would see these wrestlers on TV, and it was my escape, right? So all this chaos and all this noise, at that point, like these characters like Hulk Hogan or, Shawn Michaels or all these crazy superstars I would see on TV, like it would give me that moment of escape. And I didn't know at that point, like, what that really was. But for me, like, I wanted to run. Like, whenever my half-brother, whenever the chaos would start in the household, like, for me, I wanted to run. I would hide in the closet. I'd get away from it. I'd run in the woods. I'd get as far away from the noise and the fighting. My grandmother was an alcoholic. She was an abusive alcoholic. So her and my mom, it was a constant fight, like, physical fight. And I would sit there as a kid and, like, just try to, like, escape from it. I just wanted that noise to stop, whatever it took, right? I didn't quite know what to do or how to escape that. But what happened was these emotions and these feelings that I would get as a kid, I was trying to get away from those. I didn't want to feel them because they hurt. And, like, whenever those feelings would pop up, it was uncomfortable, and I just didn't have nobody to talk to. Because everybody was so busy in the chaos, it's like, what do you do as a kid? Where do you go for help? Like, I wasn't taught about this. Nobody taught me what these feelings or what these emotions were as a kid. It's like Chris was talking about earlier, being young and having all this stuff going on in your head, and it's like, what do you do with it? So about 10 years old, I met these two friends of mine. I grew up in North Carolina, a small town called Cameron. We started to build this wrestling ring out of a trampoline in our backyard, and I found that that was my escape. Like, even though my dad was, I didn't have a father anymore, and I didn't quite understand what happened at 9 years old. I just knew he was in an accident, and he was in a coma, but I didn't understand how that was going to affect me because I was just reaching those years to where my father was my hero. Like, I looked to him to be my hero, and, like, he promised me all these things. I'd go with him to do this carpentry work, and he would talk to me about building my house one day. He would talk to me about how he was going to teach me to build things and how to work on things, and, all these promises that a father would tell their kid. It was like the promises were made, but then it was cut short by this car accident that he got into. So I felt alone. I felt abandoned. I'm like, man, what do I do now? I don't have a mother or father because my father's in the hospital. My mother, she's taking care of him. And it's like, I don't have nobody. I felt alone. So me and my friends, whenever we started this journey with this wrestling ring, which kind of, like we built this ring, we imitated what we seen on TV, and it felt good because I felt like I had family with these guys. And then one thing led to the other, and we learned the art of pro wrestling. We finally met some people that could actually train us. And then we started venturing out on the road and trying to chase this dream that I seen these big stars on TV have. And I was like, man, I'm going to do that. And I knew in my heart, I knew deep down that I could do this. But whenever we got on the road, I started being raised by these men, and I looked up to all these men on the road. I was 13, 14, 15 years old, and I'm being raised by a bunch of savages. Like literal savages. Like, you've heard the stories of these guys because that's what it was. Like back then in the 90s, especially like in the independent scene where I was coming up through, it was sex, drugs, rock and roll. So at 13, 14, you get introduced to this lifestyle that you're amazed by at first, but then it pulls you in. And like for me at 14 years old, I'm wrestling at strip clubs. Like I couldn't even legally get into these strip clubs, but my music would hit and they would rush me through the door and I'd run in, I'd wrestle, get done, and I'd go back to the car. And it was like I was being introduced to these situations that a normal 14-year-old boy shouldn't be introduced to, right? So as that went on and time went on, like I finally landed this deal out in Music City Wrestling, which was in Nashville, Tennessee. And that's whenever I started making decent money. But I got put into this atmosphere of you get what you want because they love pro wrestling there. And it was so weird because I would be out there and I'd be selling my merchandise and mothers would come up to me and pretty much offer their young daughters to me. And it was awkward. I knew it was wrong, and it was like, man, like how messed up is that? How can this woman come to me and say, hey, that's my daughter over there. I don't know how old they were, but they wasn't old enough to take part in anything like that, and pretty much offer their daughter up. And it's like I started seeing more stuff like this go on. And the more that I was on the road and the more money I made, the more stuff like this I would see. And then I started to, like, I don't know, 18, I signed with WCW. I end up in a major company, and I end up getting a tour bus as part of, like, what they're going to do storyline with us. Like, me and my partners, we get a tour bus, and our job basically is to tour from New York down around Florida into the Gulf, and we were going to end in South Padre Island, where we had this big pay-per-view. But our job was, at 18, 19 years old, was to party at every college. Like, we want you to stop at every major college, and we want you to party. We're going to film it. I don't know if you guys remember Headbangers Ball, but Ricky Rackman was the host of Headbangers Ball, and he toured with us. And they would film like 15 minutes in every college we went to, then the cameras would turn off. And we had a tour bus parked out with our pictures on the side of it, and you can only imagine what would go on in on those nights, those crazy nights, right? So I was being introduced to all this crazy stuff, being so young, and it was fun at that point. And I'm sure a lot of you guys can relate that partying at first, like, it's fun, but then the shit gets real. And when it gets real, it ain't fun no more, because then you know you're trapped, right? Can you guys relate to that? So as time went, like, the more money I made, the more fame I got, the crazier my addiction got, right? So time goes on. WWE, I'm killing it. I've been in every major pay-per-view. I've been in Starcades. I've been in WrestleManias. I was in Bound for Glories. And then finally, my addiction become more important in my career. And whenever that happens, that's whenever we make that trade that we can't take back, right? We trade the drugs, the alcohol, the substance, the sex, whatever it is, for the important things in life. And at that point, I'd already been through one marriage. I was living two lifestyles. I had a wife in North Carolina. I had a girlfriend in Chicago. I had a house in North Carolina. I had a house in Chicago. I was flying back and forth just trying to manage both of them until the pressure, man, it built so thick that I couldn't take it no more. And I finally just kind of exploded. And then the more my drug use kicked in, the more pressure I would get under, the more my drug use would get worse. So then, going through a divorce, lost everything, built it back up. I'm still on the road. Finally, my career starts suffering, and I'm like, you know what? Like, I'm going to do something to where I can keep partying, and I don't have to worry about anybody firing me. I'm going to open my own business. So I opened a tattoo shop that was really successful, man. And I started raking in the cash, and I was really proud of what I'd built. But whenever you're in your active addiction, that success turns to something evil. And the more successful I made my business, the more craziness I brought into my business. Before you know it, like, I had drugs moving in and out of my business. I had motorcycle gangs, like, I was connected with them. I was a known associate on the 1% groups on the sheriff's department, being associated with the 1% group, I was selling guns. I had all kinds of, this illegal stuff going on, but yet I'm on TV, and in the local area, other than the cops, everybody looks at me like I'm a celebrity. They're going, man, this dude made it. Like, he dug his way out of a hole. He took himself from this small town of Cameron. He made it to TV. He made it to this major wrestling organization. He opened his own business. But inside, I still wasn't fulfilled. There was something missing. I had the houses. I had the cars. I had the money. I had my own business, and it's like there was still something missing. I remember I built this big house on a golf course. I'll never forget it, and I remember this day, and I can feel it. I can feel it inside. I remember sitting in the living room and looking around at this beautiful home, and I was like, man, like, this just ain't it. I'm not happy. Like, I just didn't feel happy. I wasn't fulfilled. So I always knew that there was something missing, and I just tried to replace it with this materialistic bullshit. Cars, women, money. And, like, that's not the missing piece. We chase this stuff, but what's missing is inside of us. And I didn't know that. I didn't know what it was, because I'm a burn it down and run type of guy. Can you guys relate to that? Any of you guys like to burn it down when shit gets good? I love to. I still do. I still have to work on a daily basis. My life's good today. But, man, me and my wife get in an argument today. I think the world's ending, man. Okay, I guess we're getting divorced. You know what? I'm going to sell the house. I'm going to go to Mexico and do something in Mexico. What are you talking about? She goes, we just got in an argument. Like, I yelled at you for not cleaning the bathroom. That's the type of guy I am, right? Take something small and you just spin it into this big, fucking, like, elaborated story. And in your head, like, I go back to my childhood. It's the same. See my brother beating his wife. What do? I go run in the closet because I don't want to confront it. I don't want to feel those emotions. I don't want to feel those feelings. I don't know how to deal with them. So whenever I say I'm a product of my childhood, that's what I mean. Like, I'm still running. I'm still that small child inside, right? I don't know what to do with these feelings and these emotions, man. So it's a work in progress. So after I built my business, like I'm still participating in the wrestling world and things are going good. But my addiction keeps getting worse and worse and worse. Finally, I lose my job again. Like I'm putting my drugs, I'm putting my alcohol. It's to the point where I'm ordering stuff from Mexico. I got drugs being FedExed in. And FedEx, like I've got their personal numbers. When they don't show up on time, I'm calling them going, hey, where you at? And they're like, I'm, Route 42. And it's like, okay, I'm going to come meet you. Can I get my package? And then it would get to the point where I would drive to them. And FedEx was basically sending me a sign like, dude, like this is getting out of hand. You're definitely a drug addict. They tried to tell me I was a drug addict before I ever even knew I was a drug addict. They would cut my packages and take the pills out so they didn't have to report me to the cops. That's how bad it got. And then I'd get pissed off and I'd call them like, hey, dude, like you owe me a package. And they're like, sir, we're trying to help you not go to jail. That's basically what they were telling me. So after years and years of that, man, it was like, man, where do I go? Like, I knew I was a drug addict, but nobody ever told me how to get sober. My family, I had alcoholics in my family, I had drug addicts in my family, and they were still like alcoholics and drug addicts. My grandmother had died from pretty much alcoholism at that point. So it's like, how do I do this? I've never seen somebody get sober before. So that was the big question in the back of my head. And then suddenly, I started going to these WWE shows. And by this point, I decided to take 2 years off from wrestling, right? Like that was my big fix. I'm just burnt out. I just need to take 2 years off. And by this point, too, I've had many friends in the wrestling industry. I think Jesus, like he had mentioned it, like we've had a lot of guys pass away from addiction and alcoholism. Lost a lot of close friends in the business. And I was a statistic and didn't even know it. So as time went, it was like, man, like how do I fix this? I didn't know how, so I started showing up to visit WWE because I ended up marrying somebody that worked for the company. And I take this hiatus from wrestling. And one of my best friends, Brian James, Road Dogg, if you guys probably know him as Road Dogg, man, he had completely changed his life. He was living in recovery. He had his issues in the past. Me and him, we had partied together. And it was like, we partied hard, dude. We was watching, I remember Mr. and Mrs. Smith, whenever that first came out. Like, this is a funny story. So me and Road Dogg, we had a long night up in TNA. I'd worked for TNA too, the same company that Chris was talking about. Long night partying. We're laying in bed after the partying was done. I'm on one side of the bed, he's on the other, and Mr. and Mrs. Smith is on, and Road Dogg's wife calls. He's like, yeah, babe, I'm here just laying in the bed with Shannon. And you would have thought that I could hear her yelling. I don't know what she said, but it was pretty much divorce, I'm pretty sure. Because whenever he said Shannon, she thought he was laying in a bed with a female. So he about got divorced, and like we still laugh about that to this day. I just did an interview with him the other day, and like we talked about it. But it's funny now because whenever I would show up at these WWE events, Road Dogg was a different person. And what I mean by different, he was sober. And he was so far up in the company, like at that point, like he was probably number 4 or 5 in the company. He was running the show, man. And I was like, how did he do this? I didn't ask him that, but I'm like, man, me and you, we were partying like months ago. And now you've somehow found sobriety, and I didn't know how to do that. But the more I would see him, the more I was interested. And I'm like, holy shit, like this dude, he got it together, man, so I can do it too. And like that's what I was thinking. I hadn't voiced this yet, and I hadn't took action. But finally, it got to the point where all these all these events started happening, and the cops started coming around more. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna sell my tattoo shop and I'm gonna bolt. If I just run, if I burn it down and run, I've got a house in Chicago. I can go live there. The cops aren't gonna mess with me no more. I can break my addiction and everything's gonna be good. I was in Chicago for 3 weeks. And about midnight one night, I decided to go pick up some stuff, right? And by stuff, I mean about 1,000 Somas and 1,000 Vicodin. Got a murdered out BMW 3 Series, like straight gangster looking drug dealer car. And I take off to go pick up my drugs. Decide to take a few drugs with the guys that I get them from. Driving back, all of a sudden my front right tire magically pops off and my quarter panel. Don't know how. I nodded out. I wasn't on Mucinex neither. So I pull over, and magically I find my wheel and I find my quarter panel, and I'm putting them in the trunk. And like I had this white tank top on, and my hair was real long, and it looked like a lampshade, like just sweaty, been up for days. And a sheriff pulls up behind me, and I'm putting the quarter panel in my trunk, and the sheriff's like, "Hey, dude, you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, man, my tire fell off, and my quarter panel, and I live right up the road. I'm a 3-wheel home, and everything's gonna be good." And like I was serious as everything. And he's like, You're what? I was like, "Don't sweat it, dude. Like my house is right up the road. I can 3-wheel it home. It'll be fine. I'll put it in the shop tomorrow and everything will be good." And he's like, "Oh, okay." So he gets in his car. I get in my car. I take off. Sparks start flying. And all of a sudden I see blue lights come from everywhere. So I jump out of my car, and my lawyer told me years before, he's like, "If you ever get in trouble," which I got in trouble a lot, "but if you ever get in trouble, jump out of your car real quick, lock the doors because they can't go in your car." And I'm like, that's the first thing that I thought of. So I jump out of my car, I lock my doors, and I'm going, "What are you doing? Like my tire fell off. Look at my quarter panel." Like they thought I was being aggressive, so cops run up, they grab me, a cop ends up falling down. I get tased, I hit my face on the ground, they throw me in the car, off to jail I go. And I sit in jail for 4 days. Nobody knows where I'm at. My wife was at home, but she was messed up too, so I'm sitting there going, man, where's everybody at? Like I'm starting to go through withdrawals, like, life sucks, like poor me, it's everybody else's fault but mine. The cops suck, everybody sucks. And I wouldn't take ownership, right? It's the blame game, man. So here I am running again, burn it down and run. Get out of there, go to court for 1.5 years trying to get out of this thing. Finally get out of it, no consequences. And that was part of my problem. The problem was like I didn't deal with consequences because fame and money get you out of stuff, man. I wish I had neither one of them, and I wish that I would have found my ass in treatment whenever I was 18, 19 years old, because I might have learned something then. But whenever you're not held accountable and you keep living the same way you're living, it's like you're not willing to change and you're not gonna change. And that's the problem. A lot of times, like, people co-sign our bullshit. And if you're one of these people where you have people surrounding you that co-signs your bullshit, get away from them, man. They're doing you more damage than they are good. You don't need them people around you, and that's what I had. Everybody co-signed my bullshit. I've got pulled so many times with a bunch of heroin in my dash for speeding 120 miles an hour. Just so many illegal acts that I probably should have been under the jail. But being on TV, having money, having fame, having people co-sign your bullshit keeps us sick. And it just kept me sick until it couldn't no more. So once I got out of trouble in Chicago, I'm like, man, you know what? What do I need to do? Just run. Burn it down and run. That'll fix it. So I jetted to Florida. I'm like, it's too cold in Chicago anyways. Short sold a $400,000 house for $92,000. Bought a house unseen in Florida. And I was like, man, this is how I'm going to get sober. I'm just going to go to Florida. We packed up our stuff. Me and my wife, we moved to Florida. In 3 weeks, I was arrested again. It's like the same thing, right? That same vicious cycle. The insanity of it, right? Doing the same thing over and over and over, expecting a different outcome, but guess what? That outcome never gets different. It's the same old shit. So eventually in Florida, man, like me and my wife, I decided to start dating this younger chick, because that's a great idea, right? Go ahead and start cheating on your wife. but I was helping her learn how to wrestle, taking her on wrestling tours, and my wife's like, hold on, let me get this right. You're going to go to Myrtle Beach for a week. You're going to rent a car, drive with this young chick to teach her how to, yeah, what's wrong with that? Like, you're crazy. And you're going to have a bunch of pills and dope with you, and you're going to be messed up, so nothing wrong is going to happen, right? But in my head, I was sick, man. Like, to me, I didn't understand. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, you don't trust me? It's like, who would trust somebody like that? You can't trust an addict, but I didn't see that. I just didn't see a reflection of myself. I was too far gone. Long story short, me and my wife, we end up splitting, end up dating a chick. What do? I get her addicted to heroin. So not only did I tear down another marriage, now I bring this young chick into my life, use the I'm going to train you in the wrestling business, scenario to get in. And then whenever she thinks that, she thinks she's getting into a relationship with a dude that's got his shit together, but really I'm all to pieces, man. She ends up getting addicted to heroin. We end up moving to North Carolina now, because guess what? Like, I'm going through this divorce. I don't have wrestling in my life at the moment other than these small shows that I can do. Go to North Carolina. I'm like, forget it. I'll open another tattoo shop in North Carolina. I did it before. I have the connections there. What could go wrong? So after a while, go to North Carolina. I'll weasel my way into this. I had $0 at this point. Like, my ex-wife, pretty much put my bank account on complete hold, had nothing to my name. I think I had a car that I traded like wrestling bookings for. That's what I got to North Carolina on. It was a Cadillac CTS, like this old one that barely ran. And we pack up, we go to North Carolina, open this tattoo shop. I finagle my way into this. My lawyer still says it's the greatest real estate deal that he's ever seen in his career of being a lawyer, because I bought a whole block of commercial buildings. I don't know how I finagled it for $8. For enough to get the stamp, the notary stamp on it. And he's like, I have no idea how you got a 0% interest deal on this commercial real estate. And I was like, oh, it's easy. He was a drug addict too. So I pretty much finagled another drug addict to sell me part of his commercial real estate to open this tattoo shop in. And I did. I put together enough money, man. We opened this tattoo shop, and people started coming because I'd already built a brand. It was Gas Chamber Inc. Like, if you Google it, you'll hear a lot about Gas Chamber Inc. on the internet. But at that point, I didn't want people to come into the shop and actually get tattooed, because it turned into my little drug den. And in that area, the cops, like the sheriffs, were a lot of my friends. I went to high school with them. And here's a guy that these sheriffs, they would look at, and I went from TV to pretty much heroin addict by this point. It's the typical story. You start out with opiates, you justify because of the wrestling industry. I had all these injuries, so the doctors would feed me pills, because at that point, that's what doctors did, man. It's like, oh, your neck hurts? Okay, here, take some Vicodin, take some Somas. But whenever those didn't work no more, or those got too expensive, it was like, hey, man, why not switch to heroin? Is there anybody can relate to that? Opiates to heroin? Okay. So as time went, I built this business up, or what I called a business, and my girlfriend, she was tattooing there. And it got to the point where it was just when my drug dealer could come by, and the tattoo artist would be knocking on the door trying to come in. It's like, nah, dude, we're closed today. I need to close the shop. I need to work on it, do some repairs. But really, that's where I was living, and that's where I was comfortable doing my drugs. The sheriffs would stop by. I had track marks all down my arms. And the sheriffs were talking about me, but they're like, yeah, man, we're trying to get rid of some of these heroin dealers that's floating around here. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to help you. I'm going to put cameras outside of my shop, and we're going to find these fuckers. And my friends were talking about me. And it got to the point where I sold that CTS, and I was left walking. And then it got to the point where, I was getting Narcan so much that my girlfriend, she's like, I got to get sober, man. And she was able to get sober on her own, and she left. She's like, man, I can't sit here and watch you die. And I'm like, oh, yeah, just like everybody else in my life, you're just going to run, huh? Okay, beat it. Go. So I was down to these last 2 weeks, man, before asking for help, and I'll never forget it. I had this like mongoose bicycle. I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember the 80s mongoose bicycle with the mag wheels. Whenever I was in Chicago, I found this dude that sold me one. It was an original, and that's the only thing that I'd held on. I traded everything else for dope. I had like 5 Harleys, Jeeps, cars, like all this cool shit, and I traded everything for dope. The only thing I hadn't traded was that mongoose bicycle and my pit bull. And I had a gun. I had one gun left too, which will come into the story next. But yeah, so I'm riding around town on this mongoose bicycle with my buddy Scott Matthews. I'll never forget it. I'm meeting my drug dealer. I'm at Publix. And like, I go from driving Corvettes and these exotic cars around town to riding this mongoose bicycle that's way too small for me. And Scott sees me in the parking lot and he's like, "Hey man, come here." I'm like, "What's up?" He's like, "What do you mean, what's up? Like, look at your arms. You look like shit." I'm like, "What do you mean? I've been working out." Like, I hadn't hit a gym in a year and a half at that point. And he's like, "Dude, look at your arms." He goes, "You're a wreck." He goes, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm buying bread. What do you do at a grocery store?" And he's like, "No, you're not." So we get in this little argument back and forth. He knows what's going on. I'm there to meet my drug dealer, man. He's like, "Look, dude, like, you need help." And I'm like, "Well, I'm good, man. Like, trust me, I'm good." And he's like, "Okay, look, I got an extra truck. Why don't you come to my house? I'll let you borrow this truck. Get your shit together, dude. Like, whatever it takes, I'm willing to give you my truck. You can't be riding a bicycle around town. Like, people still look up to you here." I'm like, "All right, dude." So now, like, I'm like, "Oh, okay, I got a truck." And now it starts hitting me. I'm like, man, people starting to notice that I have a problem. Like, the sheriffs have been trying to tell me. The sheriffs would tell me, the sheriffs would stop by and go, "Shannon, tonight we got a traffic check going on a quarter of a mile down the road. Whatever you do, do not go through this traffic check." And I swear to God, like, there was 2 times where I went to go get dope, picked my dope up, and what did I do? I went right to the traffic check that he said not to the point where he would confiscate, he would take the dope, and they would take me back to the tattoo shop, and they'd go, like, "Dude, get help. Like, we don't want to arrest you. We don't want to ruin your life. Just get help." And I still couldn't get it. It's like Chris was talking about, right? Like, we do all this stupid shit, and God, he'll smack us right in the face with these signs that we need to get sober. And like, we don't take it, we don't get it, because we're not ready. We're not ready for the help, because we think we're going to outsmart it again. We think we're going to get away with it again until we don't. So at this point, I'm to the point where, I've lost everything. Every materialistic item that I've had's pretty much gone. This building and this commercial real estate, like, I can't pay for it because I was spending $1,000 a day on heroin at that point. So it was just every bit of money that I could get was going on heroin. I wasn't paying bills, but in my head, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to blame somebody. Who should I blame? So then I started thinking about my ex-wife at that point. Well, she wasn't my ex-wife. She was still my wife at that point. And I'm like, she's to blame. She's the reason for this. Because we got to pick that one person, right? We got to pick that person that has to be the reason that we're fucked up. So I put this plan together. I'm like, you know what? Like, I'm going to take her out. Like, you know what? You caused all this pain to me. And this was my thought. And like, now looking back, like, I'm not that person, but this is how sick I was. And this is how sick these drugs and the alcohol can make us whenever we're not in our right mind. I'm like, she's the reason that I'm in this position. She's ruined my life. She's taken everything from me, which is not true, because I gave everything to drugs and alcohol. I'm the problem. I didn't see that, but I'm going to blame her. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to head to Florida, and I'm going to take her out. I'm going to put my gun in the car. I'm going to put my dog in the car. I'm going to go down. I'm going to take her out. I'm going to burn the house down. I'm going to kill myself, and it's going to be over, and I don't have to worry about this shit no more. Like, that's where I got. That's how dark it got. And that's what I did, man. I set out on this mission, man, and the whole time, like, I take the last few dollars that I could scrounge up or whatever I could sell, get as much dope as possible, and I head toward Florida. And in my head, like, I really don't want to go through with this. Like, I'm just screaming for help. I'm basically going, please, God, like, somebody, like, help me, stop me. Like, I don't want to do this, but I have nowhere to turn at this point. Like, I was hopeless. I was at that point where I knew I was completely hopeless. I knew that I had nowhere to turn from there. I had nobody to back me. and that I was a shell of myself, and I'd become this person, this misery that I didn't want to be. So as I'm driving to Florida, I probably get 3 hours from Florida, and on Twitter, I reach out to my buddy Brian James that I seen, or Road Dogg, that you guys probably know from TV as Road Dogg, and I'm like, hey man, I'm about to do something really dumb, and it's probably going to be all over the news. And I was like, but I'm not happy. I haven't been happy for a long time, but I just want to say thank you because you've been one hell of a friend. And I didn't get a response, so I get to the house, and I don't know what had happened, but my wife at that point, she wasn't at the house, and I'm just sitting there, and I remember it. I've got my gun. I work my way into the house. I kick the door open or pry it open to get in there, and I'm sitting there, and I finally get a message back from Brian. And Brian's like, hey, Shannon, I'm on my way to TV. He goes, but help is on the way. He's like, don't do whatever you're going to do. I've heard where you're at. And I've got the message. I wish I'd have printed it out so I could read them to you guys. But he basically said, you say you're not happy, but God wants you to be happy, Shannon. You can be happy again. There's a way to do this. And through these words, it was that search that I had of what I need to do in order to find this peace, this serenity, or sobriety, or recovery, whatever you want to chalk it up to be, that I'd seen in Brian. In just a few sentences, he gave me enough hope to go, okay, there's somebody that can stop me from doing this. Because like I said, deep down inside, I didn't want to commit any kind of act. I really didn't want to kill myself. And I'm not that person that wants to take somebody else's life. So why was I having these thoughts? But I'm like, man, this dude just told me in 3 or 4 sentences that there's hope on the other side of this thing. You mean I can beat this? I don't have to go through with this act? And that's what it was. And then finally, I get a phone call and I talk to Brian. And whenever I talk to Brian, he's like, dude, I'm on at WWE. They're going to send you to treatment, dude. You can do this. I did it. And he shared his experience, strength, and hope. And whenever Chris was talking about the 12th step, that's it. That's all it takes. And that's what we're doing here today. We're just reaching that hand out. Because if there's anybody out there that's doubting that you can find hope on the other side of it, this is our hand. This is me going look, dude, I've been to the gates of hell with this thing. And I fought it. And whatever you're feeling right now, there's hope on the other side of this thing. And I finally seen that. And I finally felt that. And I'm like, man, there's really hope. I don't have to keep feeling like shit. And I don't have to keep being this person that I'd become. So 24 hours later, man, I was sitting in treatment. And the best gift I ever got was the gift of desperation, right? Whenever we hit that bottom, the gift of desperation, whenever we just have nowhere to turn. Because sometimes whenever we finally get there, we have to walk through hell in order to see that, man. For me, that's what it took. It took me to lose everything. It took me to, almost or just start thinking about doing these acts that I normally wouldn't do in order to feel that. And it's the greatest thing that ever happened. The greatest thing that ever happened to me was the fact that I lost everything. Because all that shit from my childhood, I never would have realized that that was part of the problem. All these emotions, all these feelings that I pushed aside, that I pushed down, whether it was drugs and alcohol, whether it was a shopping addiction, whatever it was, whatever that, that dopamine rush that we need to feel good, right? Whatever it takes, whether it's drugs, alcohol, sex, gambling. It's that's what I would do when these emotions would pop up. I wouldn't process them. I wouldn't confront them. I wouldn't work through them. I would use one of those to feel better, to make me feel good. So whenever I landed in treatment in 2017, December, I'll never forget it, man. They picked me up in this van. Raise your hand if you've been to treatment before. Nice. Did you guys have names for your van? The druggy buggy, the Ativan. Yeah. So I get picked up in the Ativan, which ended up being the greatest vehicle ever. And to this day, I still drive them, which is awesome. And I'll tell you that in a little bit. But yeah, so this lady picks me up in this van, man. And I was desperate. I was at my bottom. I was like, man, I'll never work for WWE again. I'll never work in the wrestling industry again. They're going to blackball me. I'm a horrible person. Like, I have no purpose no more. I'm just going to go to treatment and see what happens. I was willing to just surrender completely. And the best feeling I had whenever I got to treatment was I come face to face with a mentor from WCW that whenever I signed in 1999. He was in treatment at the same time. And this is the guy that showed me, talk about God's work, right? So whenever I get to treatment, in 1999, the man that greeted me, that helped me, that taught me the way of the road there, was in treatment himself. And whenever I got there, he was there and he gave me a big hug. He's like, man, I've been here for weeks. He's like, the fight's over, dude. He's like, go lay down. He's like, let's get to work. And I trusted that because not only did Road Dogg give me enough hope to go through with the process of going into treatment, but whenever I got to treatment, God put this angel right there in front of me that mentored me years and years before to go, okay, dude, go lay down. It's done. You can do it now. And that was the greatest feeling ever. Whenever I hit that bed, I finally felt, it just felt like the world had opened up and the weight was off my chest. And I'm like, finally, somebody can teach me these things that I need to know in order to not put another substance in my body, to have to feel normal on a daily basis again. I'll finally get to see what life's all about. And it was the greatest decision I ever made. And through that process, like something magical happened, man. Like these emotions and these feelings started to pop up, and like I would start crying. I'm like, what is that? Like I couldn't remember the last time I had cried until I went into treatment. And the mentor that I had, I'll never forget it, he coined out. You guys know what a coining is? That's been to treatment, right? Whenever you coin out, whenever you did all the shit you're supposed to be doing and you clean your room like a good boy and girl. And they go, okay, like here's your coin. You're free to go. You're a free bird. Well, he coined out that day, and we both started crying. It was like he was like we were married, and like he was dying or something. I'm going, what is this? Like he was crying, I was crying. We couldn't stop. We were hugging. It got real weird. And I'm like, dude, I don't know if I like this or not. Like this got way too weird, way too fast. Like, you got to get out of here because like now you've embarrassed me and everybody thinks I'm a punk now, and like this ain't cool. But those emotions started to pour out, man, and like these therapists, man, like if you've been to treatment, if you're in treatment now, or if you haven't worked with a therapist, like if you're struggling, like I still work with a therapist, like I'll have a therapist till the day I die because like it's the greatest thing ever to be able to talk to somebody and them hold you accountable and go, nah, you're crazy. So if you don't have a therapist, get a therapist. You'll like it, trust me, in a few months. But these therapists, they taught me something. They taught me that I was fixable. I wasn't just broken and couldn't be fixed because that's what I thought. I looked into the mirror and I hated what I seen. I was a horrible man. I had all these horrible acts in my head. I did so many horrible things. I had these wives that I did all this crazy stuff to, and if you've worked the steps, whenever you get to step 4, man, it's the greatest step ever because you start to dump this stuff and you get to work through it. You get to process it. And whenever you learn these steps do something magical. These steps teach you how to walk through life, and as life on life's terms pops up, man, like we hit it head on now. And it's the best feeling ever because we actually walk through it instead of burning it down and run. And it takes work to do that. And I have to work on it on a daily basis. Like I said, ask my wife. She thinks I'm crazy still. But on a daily basis, she still tells me, like, you know, like, hey, dude, like, you don't have to burn everything down and run. Remember what your therapist said? And it's like we have to have that constant reminder on a daily basis. And that's what these steps do. That's what these programs do. That's what these meetings do. That's what these sponsors do, man. It keeps that feeling in our stomach. So whenever we walk into a meeting, I know for me, like I'm one bad decision away from being back in a detox. I'm one bad decision away from being back there, and I don't want to go back. So I want to go into a meeting as much as I can. Whenever I walk into a meeting, I hope somebody says something that makes me completely sick. I want it to spark that sickness and that gift of desperation again to where I feel where I was those 2 weeks prior of going into treatment. Right? Shut the door on the past, but don't forget about it. That's the way I look at it. And I don't want to do that. And that's the one thing that I keep in mind now whenever opportunities come up to be able to reach my hand out and help somebody. You know, Chris called me and he's like, hey, man, I got this idea for Night of Recovery. How about we take this thing on the road and we start trying to help other people? We start trying to help them whenever they've reached that point, they've reached that bottom, to show them, like Brian showed me, like there's hope on the other side of this thing. And I'm like, dude, I'm in. What does it take? What do you need from me? And he's like, well, just get on a plane. Let's do it. So we started doing it. And the more we do it, the more guys were able to pull into it. Chris, you know, Jesus. And we got more and more guys, but we want this to be an addiction within itself, but a good addiction, right? So we want you guys to be the next ones. We want you guys to be pulling other people up. We want you guys to be putting together things like this, because there's somebody out there right now. And if it might not be anybody in here, but there's somebody out there right now that's at that bottom, that's living in that insanity. It's not them. And they're thinking about doing that next dumb thing. They're thinking about going and harming somebody. They're thinking about offing themselves, killing themselves, because they don't feel like they're worth finding that hope on the other side, right? So that's our only obligation, man, once we get on the other side of this thing and we're fighting this addiction thing. The only obligation that we have is to help the next person. And that's what I hope that you guys got from today a little bit. If there's anybody out there struggling, if there's anybody you know that's struggling, all it takes is one sentence. For me, it took a few sentences to see hope on the other side. So don't be afraid to share your stories. Experience, strength, and hope. That's what it's all about. Get out there, share your stories, and help that next person, because that's what it takes. And that's what recovery is all about. Recovery is about pulling that next person up. There's nothing else more powerful than your story. You'll never own an asset, a materialistic item that's more important than your story. You can have $10 million in the bank, you can drive a Bugatti, but if you put an addict in the front seat of that Bugatti and you ride them around, they're going to get out and still be an addict. You share their story with them, you can change their lives forever. Thank you guys for having me. Chris, thanks for bringing me in.
That's why I needed popcorn. You see? You see? Wow. So, because we're running a little bit over time, I'm going to wrap this up in a fairly quick and a fairly simple way so that we can all get together and talk and hang out. I'm super excited about that. First, one more time, give a round of applause to all these guys up here. Second, give a round of applause for Tuscarora Managed Care Alliance. For putting this thing together, for inviting us out here, for inviting us to your community to be a part of it tonight. Has been such an honor. And I think one of the things, the most important thing that I caught from all of these stories here is that in every instance, all four of our stories, there was somebody there to pull us out. Every single time I meet somebody who's in recovery, somebody who's in recovery from substance use disorder, mental illness, whatever it may be, there's always somebody here to pull us out. So I want to leave you tonight with a simple challenge, a very personal challenge from me to you. Whether you're here tonight in the theater, whether you're watching it on whatever streaming service you're watching it on, this is my personal challenge. Become armed with the facts about addiction. Call your local treatment centers. Hit Google. Whatever it might be, figure out what the resources are so that when that day comes, that your loved one, the person you're with, yourself, whoever it might be, when they're in that pit of despair, when they're about to maybe make a life-altering decision, like Shannon was talking about, make sure that you have that information. Make sure that you have that in your heart. Make sure that you have that in your mind. And be the one, be prepared to pull your neighbor and your loved one out of that pit. So one more time, I want to thank you guys for having us here tonight. It's such a beautiful night. That's all I got.